The show opens in the year 1947, where Father McMurtry is seen giving a sermon at a church. After completing the session, he bids goodbye to one of his parishioners and walks back to his quarters. Unbeknownst to him, a young man, Edmund Tollison, is keeping a close eye on him. Upon arrival, Father McMurtry joins his friends for dinner. While eating, the other priests plan on going for a movie, but Father McMurtry feigns illness and decides to stay home. After the meal, he heads to his room, locks the door, and takes out a lingerie magazine to gratify himself. At least the people in that magazine are of age. However, his private time is soon interrupted by a doorbell. The father goes to answer the door and finds Edmund, who pretends that his car broke down. Unaware of his actual intentions, Father McMurtry invites him inside, offering coffee. Later on, the other priests, Andrews, Coleman, Adeyemi, and Monsignor Sullivan, return home from the show and retire to their respective rooms. Adeyemi heads into the bathroom only to be greeted by a grim sight: the lifeless body of Father McMurtry in the tub with his throat slit. Just then, Edmund appears from behind and bashes Adeyemi's face into the toilet seat repeatedly until he dies. The commotion alerts the other priests and they come out to check. However, they also succumb to the same fate. At last, Edmund comes face to face with the old Monsignor. Before attacking him, the young man reveals that he's the son of Margaret McGuire. She is the same woman who was assaulted by the priests, forcing her into prostitution. Edmund then stabs Monsignor with a kitchen knife while asserting that someone killed his mother in the brothel house, making him an orphan. Unbeknownst to him, Father Andrews witnesses the horror from under the bed, desperately trying to keep quiet. The scene then cuts to 6 months later, showing our protagonist, Mildred Ratched. She is sitting inside her car in a gas station watching young people sharing a passionate kiss. Shortly after, an attendant hands her a map to Lucia and the newspaper detailing the vicious priest massacre. Upon going through the news, she learns that the killer will soon be sent to Lucia State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Following this, Mildred heads to Lucia, California, a small city with only 985 inhabitants. After a long drive, she arrives at an oceanside motel and checks into her room. She then talks with the owner and learns that several reporters are flocking into the city because there's a $5,000 reward for anyone who gets the first shot of the clergy killer. Just before she enters her room, Mildred catches the eye of a neighbor, Charles Wainwright, but the owner makes it clear that she isn't allowed to share her room with any guys.
No making me jealous, it's against the rules.
The next day, Mildred drives to Lucia State Hospital and meets the head nurse, Betsy Bucket. She introduces herself as a new night shift nurse and shows her a job interview letter, claiming that she has an appointment with the head of the hospital, Dr. Richard Hanover. But neither Betsy nor Richard seem to have any prior knowledge of this. Betsy then asks her to come back some other time because the doctor hasn't arrived yet. However, Mildred decides to wait as she has no other work to do. Sometime later, she goes to the bathroom where she hears a distant scream and clattering. She follows the noise to the adjacent room and finds a nurse, Amelia, engaged in intimate activity with an orderly.
Nurse, hand me the stethoscope. Stat.
Meanwhile, Richard is seen waiting for his appointment with Governor George Wilburn, but the meeting is once again postponed. Turns out that Richard has been visiting the governor's office every month in order to pitch for funding of this hospital, but the uninterested George refuses to meet him every time. When Richard returns back to the hospital, he is informed about Mildred. The doctor has no recollection of such an appointment, but Mildred masterfully manipulates the conversation in such a way that he forgets the topic of the interview. She reveals that she was a nurse in the Pacific Theater during the war and that she aims to cure as many people as she can. Although he admires her passion, Richard doesn't have enough resources to bring her on, nor are there any openings. On her way out, Mildred steals Amelia's purse and learns her home address. It seems she likes getting screwed, and Ratched is happy to oblige. In the next scene, she goes to Amelia's house, where she finds her husband and daughter heading out. She pretends to be her school friend who has come here to meet her, but since Amelia isn't home, her husband agrees to tell her about the visit. Mildred then heads to her motel, where she crosses paths with Charles and invites him to her room. As they come closer, she feels uncomfortable and suggests that they sit and talk for a while. However, the guy doesn't seem to be interested in this, so he leaves. That evening, Mildred meets with Amelia at a bar and blackmails her into giving up her nursing position. She claims that she desperately wants a job at the hospital, and since there aren't any openings, she is forced to create one. And if Amelia doesn't comply, she'll expose her secret affair to her husband. On the other hand, Richard receives an unexpected unexpected visit from George's secretary, Gwendolyn, who proposes making his hospital the centerpiece of the governor's re-election campaign. With the success of Lucia State Hospital, they can force the public to see the governor as a leader. Upon realizing that it's beneficial for the hospital, Richard agrees to the proposal. In the aftermath, he instructs Betsy to arrange a patient-to-staff ratio of 10-to-1, but they seem to be short on staff. So, Richard remembers Mildred and hires her immediately. With the governor finally willing to back Richard, the press surrounds the hospital. As a result, Betsy instructs the staff to perform their duty in the utmost professional manner as possible. Later that day, the governor visits the hospital, and Richard gives him a tour. In the meantime, Mildred prepares the daily medicine cart for their patients, during which she grabs a blood pressure reducer and slips it into one of the patient's medication. This causes the patient to collapse, which catches everyone's attention, including the governor's. She then takes the spotlight by saving the patient's life, which makes her a star in the eyes of the press and the governor. Afterward, Mildred chats with one of the patients named Dario Salvatore and tries to manipulate him into committing the unthinkable. She bonds with him over a common topic of losing a brother and eventually reveals a harsh truth. He'll never get out of the hospital because his family doesn't want to see him again. She further asserts that he deserves to be free from all the pain and then guides him to Richard's office, showing him a letter opener. Dario uses this tool to slit his own throat, which kills him on the spot. All of this seems to be a big ploy by Mildred to work her way up the ladder. While the governor addresses the press, Richard returns to his office room and is horrified to witness the brutal death of Dario. He panics, thinking about the consequences if the press finds this out. At the same time, Mildred approaches him and assures that she'll take care of the body, pretending to be a great helper. Richard then joins the governor in the press conference, while Mildred cleans up the room and disposes of the body in the incinerator. The same night, Edmund is brought to the hospital to determine if he's well enough to stand trial. He is taken to a secure cellar beneath the hospital and locked there. Seizing the right moment, Mildred sneaks into the basement to meet him. Tears run down their faces as they see each other, indicating that they share some kind of bond. Edmund tells her that he doesn't want to die, to which she promises that she will save him. Following the mass media coverage of Governor Wilburn's support of Lucia State Hospital, Richard introduces his breakthrough treatment, the frontal lobotomy. As a result, hundreds of people afflicted with different mental illnesses admit themselves to the hospital. Among the patients are Len Braunley, a former theater actor with memory loss, Lily Cartwright, experiencing struggles related to her sexual orientation, Peter, a young man troubled by daydreams, and Ingrid Blix, a renowned European opera singer grappling with melancholia. Richard, who is confident in his treatment, invites Randall Berglund, the head of the State Detentions Bureau, Annie Hardcastle, an administrative assistant to the Director of State Finance, and Gwendolyn. And who the hell cares about what Gwendolyn is or does? To observe the treatment process. Shortly after, the patients are brought to the operating theater and are mildly sedated before undergoing the lobotomy procedure. The process proves to be too gruesome, which is evident by the fact that Annie faints as Richard drills into the patient's skulls. Later that day, Mildred visits Father Andrews, the only survivor of the clergy killer's attack. She tries to convince him that she's on his side and that she wants to cleanse the world of evil like Edmund. For this, she urges him to describe what he saw to Richard. Andrews is reluctant to speak on the matter, as he seems to have had a nervous breakdown following the attack. However, Mildred emphasizes the necessity in doing so, because Edmund will commit more crimes if he's released. The conversation breaks the father into tears, clearly showing that he's weak. Back at Lucia Hospital, Mildred goes to the kitchen to find Betsy holding her peach. She demands it back, but Betsy taunts her by taking a bite instead. Unfortunately for her, that was Timothy Chalamet's peach. Although infuriated, Mildred remains composed and simply warns that she will regret her actions. Their dispute is suddenly interrupted by Richard, who admits that the earlier lobotomies weren't a success as he hoped. Therefore, he'll be demonstrating an alternative operating procedure, the transorbital lobotomy, involving drilling through the eye socket to access the thinnest part of the skull. As the procedure commences, Richard inserts the ice pick just above the eye and hammers it to a certain depth. This sight disgusts Betsy, causing her to puke on the floor. Richard is furious to see this and kicks her out of the operating room. On the contrary, Mildred is fascinated by the procedure and applauds for the doctor.
Oh, very sexy, Doctor.
The next day, she is having her lunch in the kitchen when she's approached by Gwendolyn. After a brief chit-chat and introductions, Gwendolyn offers to show Mildred around town, which the latter agrees to. Following this, she takes her to a bar where she teaches Mildred how to eat oysters. You just gotta go. Gwendolyn then drives her to a women's bar, assuming Mildred to be a lesbian like herself. However, this only offends the latter, promoting her to storm out of the place in anger. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Richard brings Edmund to his office for psychiatric evaluation. However, the young man rambles on and on about antennas in his head and other matters. Richard suspects that he is exaggerating his mental illness in order to avoid the death penalty. In an attempt to fetch the truth, he claims that he doesn't believe in capital punishment and that he wants to help him. Despite his efforts, Edmund doesn't reveal anything, so Richard calls his security guard to take him back to his cell. In the next scene, Mildred receives a call from Father Andrews, who finally agrees to share his story about the massacre. As a result, she picks him up and drives him to her motel room. While he's distracted, she discreetly slips an anesthetic into his tea, eventually making him feel dizzy and pass out. When he regains his consciousness, Andrews finds himself strapped to the bed. At this point in time, Mildred reveals that Edmund is none other than her brother, leaving him in utter shock. She further asserts that he wasn't born a monster, someone turned him into one. Following this revelation, Mildred performs a lobotomy on Andrews, driving an ice pick into his eye. In the final scene, 2 state prosecutors visit Father Andrews to question him about Edmund, but he is now completely mute and paralyzed. Subscribe for more videos like this. Turn on notifications, and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.